Hello, everyone. This is Catherine Francis, dietitian with Legacy Health, here to talk to you today about nutrition for a healthy heart. So before we get to nutrition for heart health, let's talk about why this is relevant. Why do we care about heart health? Well, heart disease is the leading cause of death for men, women, and people of most racial and ethnic groups in the United States. This affects everyone, you guys. 1 in 3 women are diagnosed with heart disease annually. In the United States, a person dies every 36 seconds from heart disease, and every 40 seconds in the United States, someone has a heart attack. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many people have delayed or avoided going to hospitals for heart attacks and strokes, which has led to poorer outcomes. Also, people have been engaging in less healthy lifestyle behaviors with the pandemic. Things like making less healthy choices with their food, eating out more, like DoorDash, drinking more alcohol, and really not moving their bodies enough, which can contribute to heart disease. The other thing to consider is just the cost of heart disease is enormous. This includes the costs of healthcare services, medicine, and lost productivity. This is a big issue. Okay, so let's take a look at what increases your risk for heart disease. Having high blood pressure or high cholesterol, smoking is a key risk factor for heart disease. There are also other medical conditions and lifestyle choices that can put you at a higher risk for heart disease. And when we look at these, diabetes, obesity, unhealthy diet, not exercising or moving your body enough, and drinking too much alcohol, these are what we would call modifiable risk factors. These things are largely preventable through a healthy lifestyle. Which brings me to food, my favorite topic when it comes to talking about healthy lifestyle choices. Heart healthy nutrition is an enormous topic, and there are a lot of different ways I could have talked about this, but I chose to narrow it down to 3 tips. So this is what we're going to talk about today: cutting down on added sugar, giving yourself an oil change. Stay tuned to hear what that means, and my favorite nutrition advice: eat more color. Okay, so tip number 1, cutting down on added sugar. I want to make the distinction here that I am talking about added sugar. This is not referring to total sugars or the sugars that occur naturally in foods like fruits and vegetables and dairy products. Okay, so how does sugar impact heart health? Well, it can increase our total cholesterol and that LDL cholesterol, decrease our HDL cholesterol. I'll talk more in a few minutes about the difference between LDL and HDL. Eating too much added sugar can increase our triglycerides, our blood pressure. It can increase inflammation in the body, which can impact the heart and vessel health. It can also increase our risk for other metabolic diseases that can impact our heart health. So how do we know if we're eating too much added sugar? Well, most of us are. The average adult eats about 7 teaspoons of sugar a day, and most of that is coming from sugar-sweetened beverages. American adults consume an average of 77 grams of sugar a day, which adds up to about 60 pounds annually. So if you want a visual, that is 6 10-pound bowling balls worth of sugar. And unfortunately, the numbers are even worse for our children. American kids consume 81 grams of sugar a day on average. That's 65 pounds of added sugar per year. And most of this is coming from sugary drinks, which means our children are ingesting over 30 gallons of added sugar from beverages alone, which is enough to fill a large bathtub over a year. The dietary guidelines for Americans recommend that we eat less than 10% of our total calories from added sugar. So if we eat 2,000 calories a day, that's 50 grams of added sugar or 13 teaspoons, because 1 teaspoon equals 4 grams. The American Heart Association wants us to go a little bit lighter with that added sugar. They recommend not more than 9 teaspoons or 36 grams of added sugar per day for most men, and not more than 6 teaspoons of added sugar, that's 25 grams per day for most women and children over 2 years old. And just to get some context of how much sugar we might be consuming, is one 12-ounce can of soda a day. I hear a lot, people say, I don't drink a lot of soda, just 1 can a day. That 1 can puts us over the limit that the American Heart Association wants us to have. Where is all the sugar coming from? Well, basically anything that comes in a package, you have to investigate. Sugary drinks are the source of over 50% of the added sugar that we consume in America, but also sweetened breakfasts. And the problem with these foods is that I feel that they're marketed as healthy foods: breakfast bars, granola, cereal, even yogurts, drinkable yogurts and smoothies. A lot of people see the fronts of those packages and think these are a healthy choice, but when we do more investigating, we find that they're a big source of added sugar. Of course, desserts and baked goods, our sweet treats are a big source of added sugar, but also our condiments can be a source of hidden added sugar. Things like syrups, marinades, dressings, jams, spaghetti sauce, ketchup, anything that comes in a package, you have to investigate. And that means you always want to check the nutrition facts on the food label. So you've got to turn that package around and look. Thankfully, the changes in the food label in the past few years have made it easier for us to target added sugar. You'll see total sugars at line 1, and then line 2, that's our added sugar. That's what we're talking about today. That's what we want to limit. Some tips are to avoid sugary drinks and foods. Really replace sweet treats, candy, and desserts most of the time with naturally sweet fruit. This doesn't mean that you don't ever get to have a cookie or a treat, but most of the time we are choosing naturally sweet foods when we want something sweet like fruit. Making more items at home with less added sugar can really help reduce added sugar in our foods. If there's not a nutrition facts panel, you definitely want to look at the ingredients. Of course, look for the word sugar, but besides the word sugar, you also want to look for any ingredients ending in OSE, the letters OSE. Those can represent sugar, things like maltose or sucrose, high fructose corn syrup. And then, of course, looking at other forms of sugars like molasses, honey, cane sugar, raw sugar, syrups, fruit juice concentrates, corn sweeteners. It is all sugar and should be treated like added sugar. Moving on to tip number 2 for heart healthy nutrition. Give yourself an oil change. So what I mean by this is paying attention to the sources of fat in your diet. And we're going to talk about what healthy sources of fats are and the things that you need to limit or avoid. First, let's start by talking about the types of fat. There are two big categories of dietary fat, unsaturated and saturated fats. In the unsaturated category, we have polyunsaturated fats, which include our essential fatty acids, those omega-3s and omega-6s. And then we also have monounsaturated fat. Don't get too bogged down with those words, mono, poly, omega. That is just referring to the chemical structure of the fats, and it's not necessary to know about that to make healthy choices in fat. Within saturated fats, that mostly is our animal foods, poultry, pork, beef, dairy, eggs, but there are some plant sources of saturated fat that would be coming from coconut oil and palm oil. Just a quick word on a third type of fat, trans fatty acids. Trans fats do exist naturally, but are predominantly created from the hydrogenation of vegetable oils. So partially hydrogenated fats, fully hydrogenated fats and oils are a source of trans fatty acids. And consumption of these fats may increase your risk for heart attacks as much as 30% and increase your risk of death by cardiovascular disease by 18%. Just a 2% increase in trans fatty acid consumption is associated with a whopping 23% increase in the incidence of cardiovascular disease and a 16% increase in premature death. These guys are bad news. Now, labeling requirements for trans fatty acids have helped to bring some awareness to this issue. So you'll see that trans fats are listed in the nutrition facts panel. The other thing I want to say about this is that we really want to limit our intake of these guys as low as possible. And sometimes that means being good detectives, because you'll see if you look on a lot of foods, the nutrition facts panel will say trans fatty acids 0. But then if you were to look at the ingredients, you might notice that the food contains hydrogenated oils. So how can that be if hydrogenated oils contain trans fatty acids? Well, that is because if the food contains less than 0.5 grams, so 0.49 grams of trans fat or less, they do not have to report it. But the problem is if we consume 4 or 5 different foods that contain 0.49 grams of trans fat, it adds up and it increases our risk for heart disease. So I want you to check that nutrition facts panel for trans fatty acids, and I want you to look at ingredients and try to limit or completely avoid foods that contain hydrogenated oils. Saturated fat, like I said, primarily comes from animals and the animal foods in our diet, like beef, pork, poultry, dairy, and eggs. But there are some plant sources, palm and coconut oils, that provide saturated fat. In more recent years, we have learned that saturated fat is not as harmful as we originally thought. However, reducing saturated fat is associated with a reduced risk for heart disease when, and this is key, you guys, when it is replaced with healthy foods. So whenever we take something out, we have to ask, what are we putting in its place? So more on that in just a minute. First, I'd like to speak to this cholesterol quandary. So cholesterol has sort of been at the center of the dietary fat debate over the years. This is because cholesterol is the major component of the fatty plaques that are known to cause atherosclerosis, or the hardening of our arteries. Most recently, we have learned that we should not only look at the total cholesterol, but really pay attention to how that cholesterol is distributed in the blood. This is where that HDL and LDL come into play. So these are abbreviations for high density lipoproteins and low density lipoproteins. So the density just refers to the amount of cholesterol versus protein that make up those molecules. Changing total cholesterol intake may have really little impact on this, but changing our fat sources and shifting the distribution of fats in our diet is likely a good idea. HDL cholesterol is considered the good or protective cholesterol in our blood. The low density lipoproteins are considered bad or more atherosclerotic, more likely to cause problems with our heart and our vessels. So let's talk about what we replace saturated fat with in order to improve our heart health. So one thing we can do is replace saturated fat with high quality carbohydrates. These are our whole and unrefined high fiber foods. Most of the research has been done on whole grains, but it is likely that other healthy carbs like fruits and vegetables and beans can also be beneficial. So more on this when we discuss tip number 3. We can also replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fatty acids like those omega-6s and omega-3 fats, the whole nuts and seeds, and the cold water fatty fish. We can also replace saturated fat with monounsaturated fats. These are the core foods in the Mediterranean diet: olive oil, almonds, pistachios. And when we replace saturated fat with monounsaturated fat, we may see improvements in our cardiovascular risk factors, including that LDL to HDL ratio, how the cholesterol is distributed in our blood. Lifestyle, exercise, these are important factors when looking at cholesterol and fat distribution in the blood. And something to know is that some people respond better to dietary changes. This is because there are differences in how individual bodies make and process cholesterol. Many foods contain a combination of monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids, as well as combinations of those omega-3s and omega-6s. This slide just shows more specific examples of sources of these types of healthy fats. Okay, so some ideas for incorporating more healthy fats into your diet. Go nuts. Using nuts and seeds as condiments can be a healthy way to boost nutrition. 5 ounces of nuts per week may decrease the risk of heart disease by 35 to 50%. So we typically want to stick to 1 ounce serving sizes because nuts are high calorie, nutrient dense foods. So I gave some examples of what an ounce of different nuts looks like, and I think it's important to eat a variety of nuts because each of them have different nutrition qualities to offer. I also want to recommend that you choose nuts and nut butters without added oils and sugars. So reading the label, making sure that the only words you see in the ingredients are the names of the nuts, okay? Cooking with extra virgin olive oil is another way that you can increase your sources of healthy fats. So when consumed as part of a lower saturated fat diet, such as the Mediterranean diet, using extra virgin olive oil can help decrease your risk for cardiovascular disease. In addition to it being a rich source of monounsaturated fatty acids, it's also loaded with phytonutrients, plant nutrients called polyphenols that lower total and smaller LDL particles and decrease oxidative stress and increase your HDL cholesterol. So lots of good reasons to use extra virgin olive oil. Um, with temperatures higher than 375 degrees, I might recommend that you look at using something like avocado oil, which also is a monounsaturated fat, but it is more heat stable than extra virgin olive oil. It can be stable up to 500 degrees. Now, since we're talking about cooking oils, I would like to pause and mention coconut oil. I get a lot of questions about coconut oil. Is it healthy? Is it something I should use? So as a reminder, coconut oil is unique because it is a plant-based saturated fat. More research is needed to better understand how this type of fat impacts our health, but what we do know is that coconut oil does have some health benefits of medium chain triglycerides and short chain fatty acids. But coconut oil is predominantly saturated fat, 91% saturated fat. So coconut oil has been shown to raise LDL cholesterol just like regular saturated fat. There are some benefits of those healthy components of coconut oil, but it's likely not enough to offset the impact it has on our cholesterol because it is a saturated fat. Now, does this mean you should never cook with coconut oil? Absolutely not. Balance is key. You can still have it, but you just need to treat it like a saturated fat and apply what we've already discussed in terms of limiting saturated fat intake to 6 to 10% of your total calories. When it comes to animal products, here are some general guidelines that we should incorporate a cold water fatty fish at least 2 times a week, something like anchovies, herring, mackerel, black cod, salmon, sardines, halibut could be in there as well. When it comes to dairy products, most healthcare professionals will recommend low-fat dairy. That may be because in general, we need to reduce our saturated fat intake. This is where you may want to consider your personal balance and personal health goals. What does your diet as a whole look like? You do want to follow those guidelines for saturated fat intake. Whole milk products actually do have more of the essential fatty acids we need, but they also do have more saturated fat. You may consider grass-fed options for dairy products as they will have a higher content of omega-3 fatty acids versus omega-6s. And I do recommend avoiding dairy products that have had synthetic hormones added. Moderate amounts of lean meats and eggs. Now, grass-fed or pasture-raised options for better omega profiles. The 2015 to 2020 dietary guidelines for Americans recommend limiting red meat intake, including processed meat, to approximately 1 week per serving. Even lean red meats may boost your risk for heart disease. This may be because of something called TMAO, which is a compound found mostly in red meat, beef, pork, lamb, and veal. Higher levels of TMAO can predict a heightened risk of heart attack or stroke because it increases the sticky platelets in our blood, which may cause more blood clots, heart attacks, and strokes. The American Heart Association does recommend limiting eggs to 2 to 3 eggs per week to keep your cholesterol intake to less than 200 milligrams per day. Again, look at your saturated fat and cholesterol intake over the course of a week, and you may have a little more wiggle room with that. Here we are in the home stretch, and we've come to tip number 3, which is my favorite nutrition advice: eat more color. The reason why I love this is because it is simple advice that holds up scientifically. Eating more color can address a lot of the nutrition concerns we have simultaneously. In terms of heart health, many of the diets that have been researched to show the most benefit all have in common an emphasis on whole fruits and vegetables and whole grains. These are things like the DASH diet, the Mediterranean diet, and plant-based diets. A big reason why eating more color is so good for our health is because of a group of nutrients called phytonutrients. So phyto means plant, and phytonutrients are the various vitamins, minerals, and natural chemicals that plants make to grow and thrive in their world. And when we eat these foods, we may be getting some of the benefit of these healthy chemicals. So two of the most common groups of phytonutrients are antioxidants and, as I mentioned with extra virgin olive oil, polyphenols. There are many reasons to eat more of these phytonutrients. Studies show that people that eat more of these have a reduced risk for chronic diseases, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Phytonutrients can help stimulate enzymes. These are processes in our bodies that can get rid of toxins, boost our immunity, improve our heart health, and improve estrogen metabolism, hormone metabolism, and even stimulate the death of cancer cells. Phytonutrients may help reduce inflammation that is associated with obesity and other chronic diseases. Phytonutrients are found in a variety of colorful foods, and a variety of colors equals a variety of these phytonutrients. So it's a good idea to eat a variety of fruits and vegetables of varied color every day. The American Heart Association recommends 4.5 cups each of fruits and vegetables per day. So 1 to 2 of each color per day. Really eating a rainbow, considering what colors you could eat more of. Also think about how darker colored plants are generally higher in phytonutrients. Think yams, dark yams versus white potatoes are going to have different and higher levels of phytonutrients. White fruits and vegetables do have some potent benefits. Cauliflower is a white vegetable, garlic, leeks, onions, they have important contributions to make as well. All different plant foods provide phytonutrients. So we've talked about fruits and vegetables, but also whole grains provide phytonutrients, and you want to use the more colorful version of the grain. So think brown or black rice is more colorful than white rice. Beans or legumes come in all different colors and provide phytonutrients. Herbs and spices are a great way to increase phytonutrients when you're cooking and lower sodium. Nuts and seeds, even teas of all different colors, black, green, herbal, can provide the body with more of these phytonutrients. I love this image from the American Heart Association, and I'm just going to leave it up here as I talk a little bit more about the benefits of eating more color. If you noticed, I haven't really mentioned sodium much, and it is true that in order for our health, we do need to watch our sodium intake, but this is one example of how focusing on color can make a big difference in our health. When we eat more color, we end up reducing our packaged foods. When we eat less packaged foods, we reduce our sodium intake. The majority of sodium intake in the standard American diet comes from processed packaged foods and fast foods. When we eat more color, we also end up eating more potassium. Potassium has been targeted as a nutrient of concern in more recent years because we do not eat enough of it. Sodium and potassium keep each other in balance in our bodies, so it's important that we monitor our sodium intake and make sure that we're getting plenty of potassium-rich foods. I often tell people to focus on colorful snacks because that can really help you cut back on a lot of the sodium and sugar in your diet. Eating more color helps you reduce added sugar, which we've already discussed is important to do for our health. We're not concerned about the natural sugars that are occurring in fruits and vegetables. It's more the added sugar like we discussed earlier in the presentation today. Eating more color also helps us eat more fiber. Fiber is good for a variety of systems in the body, including our heart, including our digestive system. The recommendations are to eat 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day for most adults. You want to follow that with plenty of water to help your digestive system process all that fiber. And if you can include at least 10 grams of soluble fiber from foods like beans, asparagus, avocado, Brussels sprouts, and whole grains, you may be able to decrease your LDL cholesterol. Also, eating more color helps us reduce our calories. Colorful foods are nutrient dense. They are fewer calories, higher levels of nutrients per bite. So when you think of snacks, just remember that it doesn't have to be complicated. It just needs to be colorful. Here I have some links to some resources, some websites to check out. Old Ways is a great place to find recipes and nutrition information for more Mediterranean style eating. A couple of resources to explore plant-based nutrition, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and nutritionstudies.org. More information on heart health can be found at the American Heart Association website, and the dietary guidelines for Americans. You can read through these completely, really nicely done document with lots of good images and tips for improving your health through healthy eating. I want to thank you for watching this presentation on healthy eating for your heart. My references are on the last slide. Take care.